Good morning. This is a meeting of the curriculum committee, of the Darien Board of Education. It is Thursday, May 26th. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, June 9th at 8:30. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Felicia Bellows here to discuss our math curriculum. So I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Tranberg and to Dr. Bellows.
Good morning. We are continuing our conversation on updating in the different content areas of curriculum. And so we have a elementary and a secondary update. So we'll actually start with Mrs. Droller this morning to do some K-5. Then we'll move over to Dr. Bellows for 6-12. And we can pause in between for questions, or we can continue through the whole, both presentations and the new questions as however you'd like to do that.
Okay.
So good morning, and we'll start with
Good
Mrs.
morning,
Droller.
Mrs. Droller. Sorry, I forgot to say hello to you.
Good morning, and I just want to say that it's been a pleasure this year working with Dr. Bellows, thank you, and continuing the work that Linda Johnson and the math team did on the mathematics K-5 curriculum. So I'm just going to share a few highlights. Thank you. I'm just going to share a few highlights of our work this year. So our Math in Focus program was implemented in 2017, and a lot of the work that we did at that time was helping teachers understand the program and really unpack the resource. And then COVID hit. So what we've really been focusing on this year is refining our implementation practice, looking at the tools and seeing how we can create math tasks that are open-ended, how we can bring it to life, how we can get kids to talk and think and differentiate. So our instructional focus has really been around problem solving and making sense of problems. And we know that one area that children always struggle with is jumping in and trying to solve a problem without really thinking about and understanding that problem. So we've been working on that, and we've been working on student metacognition. We have had the pleasure of working with Nicole Bridge, who is a consultant from Math Solutions. She started working with us in 2018. She really connects with teachers. She's super smart. We have also had her work with our grade level leaders multiple times this year to help build capacity and facilitate PLC meetings. So in the next slide, I'm going to show some of that work, but I will talk more about how the PLCs have really been around not only looking at the math textbook as a resource, but looking at what are the priority standards and how do we know what students already know? How do we know what our target goals are, and how are we building that capacity in kids and in our teachers? We worked with Nicole Bridge also as part of our Math Acceleration Committee work, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then professional development. So as I said, she worked with our grade level leaders to build capacity in their leadership of leading PLCs. That was a shift in our PLC work this year. And then she also worked with 2 grade levels in each building. So it was building-based PD. She worked with 5th grade in every school because they really did not have the same kind of professional learning because their implementation was 2021. So it was like the spring of COVID when we shut down was when they were supposed to have training. So she worked exclusively with them, and then with another grade level in each school. So when I said we were looking at student thinking, these are just 2 examples. This 3rd grade classroom is a multiplication lesson, and students are sharing their strategies in first solving problems themselves and then sharing with a partner. So we're really pushing explaining your thinking because that is mathematical reasoning, and we want students to be able to be strategic and use a variety of strategies and be able to tell why they did something, not just solving a problem. This is a 5th grade example from unit on volume, and kids are looking at the difference between two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes, looking for patterns, generalizing, and again, making their thinking visible and then sharing with a partner. And you'll notice they're using manipulatives in 5th grade, which is also something that we are really feel strongly about. This is some of the work that Nicole did with our grade level leaders. So what would a PLC activity look like when we're setting student learning goals and looking at data? What are the guiding questions? And then looking at our Math in Focus resource, where would you tap into in our resource to build on each of those things? How would you use the chapter overview, looking at the test first to see what the learning goals really were, and then thinking about math talk and all, really pulling those components out. And then we held a parent information in March. Nicole Bridge again facilitated that. We wanted to focus on the mathematical practices to foster success. A lot of the questions that parents asked were, how are students challenged and what can I do at home? And a lot of parents ask the question about, my child is bored in math. They know the answers and they're frustrated with having to explain their thinking. And Nicole was really explaining to parents, as she does so beautifully, the importance of explaining your thinking. It's not about getting the answer. It's really about how did you solve it and what do you really know conceptually. So that was a big focus. And then the other thing that we're working on is curriculum development. So I know that you've heard about EduPlanet 21. We are really excited about that. The math team are the primary curriculum writers. We've already worked with Dr. Bellows and the 612 folks to develop transfer goals, which we feel really good about. And we're going to focus first on grades 3-5 in math. One of the reasons is because it's part of our math acceleration for a variety of reasons. It's part of our math acceleration. Those teachers have had the least training. Their content is the most rigorous, and we're focusing on literacy in K2. So teacher feedback all along the way is a big part of our curriculum writing process. And we have teachers that, we're going to field test in classrooms. We're going to show them what we're doing. We're going to see, we're trying to put things in teacher language. So how easy is this for you to understand? And then our math acceleration committee, that's not really a part of this presentation, but again, Dr. Tramberg and Dr. Bellows and I have all been involved in this. This came out of our gifted evaluation considerations. So we have been working all year with this committee. We have reviewed a plethora of research. We have looked at our own district practices. We have gone on site visits. We have talked to colleagues in, I would say, a majority of our tri-state districts who are all grappling with a lot of the same issues that we are. We did a professional consultancy, as I said, with Nicole Bridge, because she has a lot of experience in curriculum development, incredible math knowledge, looking at pathways for students. And we have a few things still to do, some more data that we want to collect, but our next step will be committee recommendations to administration. So I don't know if you want to pause for questions now or move on to Dr.
I think
Bellows.
it probably makes sense to pause for questions, for K5 questions now. And we'll open it up to anybody who would like to. Go ahead, Mrs. Worm.
So you mentioned the manipulatives in 5th grade and that you like them. I'm kind of curious as to why, and is it for everyone? Because we're also talking about acceleration. And I do understand the idea of these higher level kids being able to explain their thinking, but is it with manipulatives, or are we talking about like being able to explain higher level thinking when they're ready for like pre-algebra?
So part of our approach is that concrete pictorial abstract. And if you think about concepts like fractions and decimals, having kids start with concrete models really shows that they have that understanding. It is very complex to multiply and divide fractions and decimals. So starting there really builds that foundation.
No, I'll add to that. So students, especially students who can move quickly through math, we often find that they have a high level of automaticity.
Yes.
So they can just go. But eventually you find a spot where they don't have a high level of metacognition. They're thinking about their thinking. It's like they have all of these learned pathways to get an answer, but when they can't get it, they don't know how. And so it's still important, even when you're in 4th and 5th grade, to have those opportunities to say, is this filling a gap? So we know you know how you're getting there, not that you can get there quickly.
Right. And I think so much of math is being able to understand exactly what you were saying. Like when I'm stuck, how do I get there? And if you don't start in that concrete phase with the manipulatives, I think some people tend to think that they're, oh, they're playing with toys. They're not toys. They're actually really helping to develop the thinking inside and the metacognition. So
Yeah, and interesting things are to come, I think, because we've been talking about the new elementary math for 2 decades now. So we are only a few years away of new teachers entering the profession, having learned the math the way that we all struggled with because we didn't learn math that way. So we're now at a point where a critical mass is going to start to have a conceptual understanding and having experience to learn math a very different way.
are you, sorry, no. Are you seeing, so we're seeing in literacy, the pendulum kind of shifting back a little bit. Are you seeing that in math or no? Like the research in terms of, it's still the automaticity and the,
No,
the drilling and killing, that we're not
that
seeing
we're-
that in math.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, somebody that we've been studying a lot of the work of is Joe Bowler, who out of Stanford University. And she really is moving away from that like quick, fast, fluid. Like she said, good mathematical thinkers take time, right? And they're slow. But they can model and they can explain and they can reason and they can critique the reasoning of others. And that's what's needed in the workplace for real math. So.
Go ahead.
Just turned it off. Thank you for the presentation. First, I just wanted to say it's always so exciting to hear about the collaboration between the elementary and the 6 to 12. So thank you for that. I think our kids are benefiting and will continue to benefit incredibly from that. I've been a part of a lot of conversations lately about progress versus achievement. And it sounds like with so much focus on the understanding behind and explaining the thinking, that this is going to help us better assess and understand where our kids are progressing, even if they haven't yet gotten to the achievement stage. Could you just talk to that a little bit?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. That's and part of our work in our curriculum development is looking at the trajectory of skills and where kids are on that trajectory and how they really show what they know, not just from taking one test, but multiple measures and formative assessment as they're learning so that teachers can adjust and monitor as part of their instruction.
So maybe I'm bridging the gap between you and Dr. Bella.
Sure,
So
Mike.
I guess my question would,
Tara, Mike.
oh, sorry. We've kind of talked a lot about the identification of students in 5th grade, what that means for middle school placement, what that in turn then means for high school placement, and are we doing it in a great way? So I don't know where and when we touch on it, and we can hold till after Dr. Bella goes and go back to it, but that's really my interest. I will say that sometimes I get concerned that in 5th grade, we're identifying a pathway that really does have implications by the time you get to the high school, unless you sort of do some interesting things. And kind of how are we looking at that as math learners emerge? And part of that is acceleration, and part of that is realizing kids might all of a sudden find a spark in 7th grade, and how do we address that, or 8th grade? So I really want to look at that transition, but we can do it whenever it fits into the presentation tonight.
We have talked a lot about that, and we have talked about our identification process, and we have talked about, as part of the math acceleration work, having pathways for kids to onboard and move fluidly in and out. But the end goal always being the same at the high school level, to have those rigorous math classes. What we want is for all students to be appropriately challenged, but not necessarily reach that maximum, that the goal is not to reach that maximum level. The goal is for everybody to be appropriately challenged at all points in their mathematics trajectory.
Yeah, and I would just add, you make an important point that I left out. As much as kids might emerge as mathematicians in 6th and 7th grade, where maybe they weren't as interested in elementary school, there may be students who were highly or appeared that they were ready to push forward, but then might need a chance to offboard and get some underlying skills too. So I would like just to make sure the pathway is fluid so that kids have the ability to push as much as they'd like, but also have a minute to say, I need just to go at a different pace, maybe.
And
So
feel good about
onboarding
that.
and offboarding. Yeah.
And I think the recommendations you'll see from actually the math acceleration group is going to address that, because we couldn't address this idea of acceleration without addressing all of those other pieces. So we really looked at it. Who are the students ready to accelerate? Who are the students that need to be challenged within the scope of a unit? And who are the students that are right at grade level standards and need the curriculum as it is delivered now? So there's 3 tiers to what I anticipate you'll see, a 3-tiered recommendation process from the committee.
Mrs. Klein looks like she wants to talk.
And if I could just add to that, I think you remember when Linda presented originally, the nature of Math in Focus really does provide for differentiation and really does allow all learners to access it conceptually and strategically. So I think the whole implementation plan involves special education teachers as well, and make sure the training is offered to all of our teachers so all our students can access it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Rule. Oh, I'm sorry.
One more question. And I know we're not really talking about this, but you touched on it, so I'm going to ask anyway. When you talked about looking at the other gifted programs around, have you looked at Greenwich at all?
Yes.
You have? Okay, just curious. I mean, I know, they're a little bit larger than us, right? Because they're looking at 7th, 8th, and 9th stay 9, and we only look at 9th stay 9, but they do have an interesting concept.
Yes.
Right, Dr. Ballas, you're up.
All right, good morning and welcome. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to present to the committee and share an update with all the exciting work that we have done at the math department. As you've heard from the previous presentations from my colleagues, the role of the department chair has strengthened and shaped the work of the discipline, all the disciplines in many different ways. And I'd like to highlight some of the aspects of the position as it relates specifically to the math department, as we have engaged in significant pedagogical and philosophical shifts in our department. I do want to start with a recap, though, of what has been done in the previous years, because it has been a while since I've updated all of you, and some of you I haven't even updated. So over the past 5 years, our department has gone through a lot of changes, a lot of transition with staff, and yet the continued collaboration and dedication has ensured consistency and alignment within our courses and has helped students reach the highest quality of instruction. One of the biggest changes that took place in the past few years has been the creation and revision of curriculum documents that have scope and sequence course guides. And these were developed a few years ago and posted on our parent and staff websites for each of our courses. When we found ourselves in a remote learning environment, these documents took on a new life. We were remote. We used these documents to ensure consistency and alignment in what we were doing, but they kind of morphed into a shared calendar, sort of like every Common Course team met, every middle school PLC met online when we were remote. And they integrated links, resources, assessments, formative assessments, summative assessments into these documents. And these shared calendars became like these live documents that really and truly ensured alignment and consistency. So those carried through into this current year. And we identified and highlighted priority standards. And it was really critical to our alignment and consistency, and to know what previous courses had covered what current courses were covered because we're all sequential. It also will lay the groundwork for the future EduPlanet work that we'll be doing in the summer and then in the next few years, because we now have a foundation and groundwork for where we're going to start and where we're going to move towards. The second area, I'm back one slide still, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm still talking on the other slide. The second area that I would like to highlight is what we've done to support struggling learners in math and all students. We currently have co-taught classes in grades 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math, and as well as algebra, algebra 2, and geometry, and lab supported classes. So our teachers engaged in professional learning with Dr. Marilyn Friend to expand teaching practices in the classroom. And this included observations of co-taught lessons in both the middle school and the high school, debriefing with teams, and developing strategies for parallel and station teaching. Station teaching, I don't know if I should explain. Station teaching is students rotate through stations, and there are two teachers in the room, and two stations are teacher led, and then the others are not. And parallel teaching is each teacher in the classroom will instruct the same lesson, but they'll split the class into two parts, and they'll do it in two different ways. So they're differentiating the instruction based upon the needs of the learners. Our teachers planned and implemented lessons using parallel and station teaching models so that they could differentiate for all learners. And then these strategies were so effective that they carried over into the regular classrooms. So next week, the middle school teachers will be supporting and participating in professional learning for the elementary school visits with co-teaching models. So I just wanted to, those were two highlights of what has been done in the past. Currently, so I guess now. Our 6 through 12 department collaborates regularly throughout the school year, and we've been collaborating during departmental time, PLC time, professional development time to investigate and share strategies to improve student discourse in the classroom. So before, when Mrs. Droller was talking about the explaining your thinking, that has been a focus of our department. It looks here like we had a lot of priorities for the school year, but they do all sort of have a same kind of common denominator, if you should say, no pun intended there. But it's all student-centered learning. All of these things are student-centered learning. So in a traditional math classroom, teachers engage in I do, we do, you do type of instruction, or in other words, the teacher does most of the talking. And we know from research that learning is most effective when a student or a learner can explain their thinking. And you really, truly don't understand something unless you can teach it to someone else and explain it to someone else. And so a significant part of our collaborative time has been dedicated to updating and revising and creating lessons that engage students in productive struggle, collaboration, and rigorous thinking. So our department focus this year has been on student-centered learning. Specifically, what strategies can we use in the classroom that will encourage mathematical discourse and productive struggle? And then also, how can we differentiate activities to provide students with appropriate levels of challenge? So in the next few slides, I have some examples, and they're just some examples. When I reached out to the department to say, in both schools, can you give me some examples of what we've done this year? Some pictures, some examples. I had so much on a shared document that they sent that I think I would have had 45 slides here, and I didn't want to do that to you. And I know math isn't always the most exciting, but it is to me and to all of us.
To me
So,
too, that's all right.
thank you. So what is promoting mathematical discourse? Increased mathematical discourse in the classroom helps students clarify their thinking, construct convincing arguments, develop the language to express their mathematical ideas, and learn to see things from a different perspective. And it's really and truly hard for students sometimes, even in high school, to explain their thinking. So here's an example of grade 8. Students are playing heads up. I actually walked into this classroom when this was going on, and I just happened to be doing a walkthrough, but they were reviewing vocabulary for the characteristics of polygons. And they were playing the game of heads up. But one student had it hit, didn't see what the card said. I don't know if you know the game of heads up. Yeah. And the other students were describing the polynomial, but the quadrilateral, but they were, it has 4 sides. And then they had to ask clarifying questions. Well, what kind of angles did the 4 sides have? And so on. So that was one example. The next slide. And then to prepare for an upcoming test, in grade 7, they had an escape room activity, and they didn't really escape the room, but it was 3 kind of tasks, but you just put the task in that way, and the students are so engaged. They're talking about it, and the problems are different, and they're rigorous, and it's student-centered. So that was another example. I did not include these, but geometry students, they had to estimate the height in the the clock in the DHS gym by using right triangle trig. So they went down to the gym and did that. They had to estimate the area of the rooftop of the Flatiron building and justify the best location for putting the bike rentals in New York City. So those were some of the tasks, the performance-based tasks that were done in geometry as well. Productive struggle. It sounds terrible, but well, the productive part doesn't. The struggle sounds terrible. But when students don't know, they face problems and they don't know how to solve them, we don't want them to just give up and say, what's the answer? Just give up. We want them to engage in making connections to what they already know and think creatively and try different avenues. So then this lesson, again, I happened to see, but I did see this because this was the product of like the teachers worked in their PLCs to plan this lesson. It was an exploratory introduction to polynomial functions. And the groups had to brainstorm what they knew about linear absolute value functions and quadratics. And then they were handed 36 pieces to 6 puzzles. So, and it wasn't about fitting the pieces together, but it was 36 pieces and they had to put together 6 puzzles. They had not learned anything about polynomial functions at that point in time. And they were, the pieces had a graph, the function in standard form, X and Y intercepts, degree and number of bends and behavior. And they had to figure out themselves how to put them together. And so it was an activity that promoted discourse and productive struggle, but it was an introductory activity because they had not learned this before. When they had completed it, and students in the next slide, you'll see that they had completed all 6 puzzles. When they completed it, they used Desmos to check their work to verify that the puzzles were completed. But in a traditional classroom and in a traditional format, this would have been the first day you're going to learn how to graph the function. The second day, you're going to learn how do the X and Y intercepts fit into the function on the third day. And with a block schedule in 82 minutes, they learned more than 2 weeks worth of class just by struggling through it, figuring it out themselves, talking about it, and putting it all together. And the following class day, the teacher, summed it up and they applied it and practiced it. But it really and truly was an example of productive struggle in the classroom.
Did the assistant principal work at it?
He popped into one of them. I don't know how he got into this picture, but he did. And I thought it was a good picture. Making thinking visible is another thing. People will say, well, what is that? And it really helps students to think deeper using critical and creative thinking skills. So in this classroom, the teacher was so excited, in one of them, in the algebra one, she was so excited that she ran into the office, like, could you come in for a few minutes? You got to see what these kids are doing. And it was algebra 1, they were reviewing factoring. They had learned the whole unit in factoring. And she gave them 20 minutes and poster board. And they had to create a factor map. How do you you approach a factoring problem? And they had made outlines with roadmap to the United States. One group had done chutes and ladders, a factor tree, and then they posted them around the room. They did a gallery walk, and the kids explained, like, how do you start a factoring problem? And it depended on their map. The one for the United States, they started in one part of the country and ended up in the other through the pathways of factoring. Very creative, very, very cool. Algebra 2 classes did a similar activity with word problems. It was a review session, and then each group took a different word problem, and then they went around the room and had to explain their problem to their peers. So that's just an example of making thinking visible or visible thinking. And now I'm going to get to the part that I get the most questions about, and it's not an easy transition, but what courses do we take and when do we take them? So I have sample pathways. I have a few up here. They're not the only pathways. I will maintain that it isn't a tracked system. In other words, there is movement between different pathways, and it can get better. I mean, we can offer more pathways in the future. So I'm just talking about a few of them, and I'll start with the traditional one. So this is grade level math. A sixth grader would come in taking grade 6 math, grade 7th, grade 8 pre-algebra, enter the high school in 9th grade. This is all grade level. And then senior year would have the option to take pre-calculus, province stats, or college math topics. So that's a traditional pathway. In the next slide, this is accelerating your pathway in the middle school. So some students developmentally are ready when they enter 6th grade. They may even be ready before that, but at this point, they're ready in 6th grade and they take advanced math in 6th grade, advanced math in 7th grade, and by 8th grade, they're in algebra or accelerated algebra. And then you can see that pathway as well. I have stars next to the classes that are offered at the honors level, which is Algebra 2, pre-calculus, and then the calculus courses are offered at both levels. So at a regular level, honors level, AB, BC, AP stats, and province stats. There, of course, like in 11th grade, students can also take AP stats. If I added every possible permutation of these things, you'd be like, what? So these are samples. These are sample pathways. The next slide.
Felicia, can I just, I was making the assumption, I think it's the grade 7 advanced course in this particular point is essentially pre-algebra.
Well,
Or
so it's
how
3
does
years
that-
and
how does
2. So it's 3 years and 2. So it's some of the 7th grade standards as well.
Sort of stuff, yeah.
So it's kind of a mixture, but
Right.
yeah, it is primarily pre-algebra. It's preparing them for algebra. The high school, there is an opportunity to accelerate the pathway in the high school, and that's by taking 2 math classes at the same time, which can be a lot for students because the negative to that is that they're taking 2 math classes in their schedule. Their schedule is full. It may take away from an elective or a free period. So it's not that's not the easiest way to accelerate, but students do it. We do have a handful of students that do it every year. I would say from 5 to 10 students each year that do this pathway because they're ready in high school to accelerate. They weren't ready in middle school. I mean, it's all about when you're developmentally appropriate, like when are they ready? And we do want to offer those opportunities for students when they're ready. And then the next pathway, and thank you for doing this, is the double accelerated pathway, which is a smaller cohort of students. Those students enter 6th grade taking the pre-algebra and then going into accelerated algebra in 7th grade. Where that pathway leads is multivariable calculus in high school. And if that's the end goal there, that's the course that they end up in. The negative to this pathway is that they're taking the most difficult course their junior year, which is BC calculus. And junior year typically for students is the most difficult year because it's the year that they have SATs and ACTs and applying to colleges. So it's a very difficult, rigorous pathway for students. But that's another option. I do have some ideas for the future. I didn't make a slide of it. And I hope to be able to propose some things next year. One of them may be an integrated course, which is an integrated Algebra 1 geometry course. So students can accelerate perhaps in 9th grade without taking 2 math classes. And it also would provide an opportunity for students who move in from outside the district, which happens a lot, or students from other countries, and they have integrated approaches. So we were always like, well, they know a little geometry and a little algebra, but we don't know where to place them. And so that would be an option for those students. And a third value to that kind of course would be that it could provide a pause for students. So students who, for whatever reason, have fallen apart in algebra or geometry and aren't quite ready for the next step, they can take an integrated course that would, solidify all their skills and concepts in those courses prior to the SATs or ACTs or anything else. So that's one thought for a possible future course, which I'm working on. And the other thought was there is now a new College Board course. It's an AP pre-calculus course, which is an interesting, I just came across it, so I don't feel confident in talking about it, but from what I've read on it, it's offering college level, college credit courses for students who are not in an accelerated pathway, which is wonderful because then you don't have that pressure to take 2 math classes in 1 year or anything else, but your senior year, you have an AP course and it's a pre-calculus course. And for some college majors, that's all you need. You do not need anything beyond that. So those are 2 things that you may hear about next year. And I thank you for your time and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bellis. That was a really, really thorough overview, and I appreciate the detail. That's great. Open up to questions. Mrs. Worm?
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say thank you. I haven't actually sat and spoken to you since 5th grade.
I know.
But you always have a very holistic approach to math, and it's always, I always love hearing it.
Thank you.
You're very thoughtful. Thank you.
Mrs. Aquin?
So Dr. Bellows and I have discussed pathways for years, so I'm very excited to hear that we have just some creative ways. I do think, just like English learners and mathematical learners emerge at different points. And so if we're creating different pathways for kids to feel successful, I think that is really exciting and kind of why we're all here. Letting kids excel, letting kids try new ways. So thank you for having your mind on this and looking at new ways, because I think it really offers opportunity to children. So I really appreciate it. And you'll get tired of me asking the question at some point, but it feels like we're making some really interesting new pathways, which I love to hear about.
Yeah, and I don't ever want the perception to be that we're gatekeepers, where we're keeping kids out of honors courses, because we really want to find those opportunities, but we don't want them in over their head either. We want to keep in mind. So we have
Yeah,
the
and
waiver in the high school now too, so it's nice.
I would just say that if it's the perception I'm saying there's gatekeeping, I don't want that out there in the public.
No,
I think
I am
sometimes-
not saying you.
No, but it's funny. Sometimes we say things and then
Yeah.
people take it to mean that they like it. So let me be super clear that I think sometimes parents perceive that there are gates, and the best thing we can do is talk about there's actually lots of different pathways and you have to find the right one for your child. And I have found the right ones, the wrong ones, and every parent, if they reach out to the administration, I think can really find good options if they ask questions. So I think sometimes there's perceptions of gates, but in reality, the more pathways we can provide and the better we let parents know we're open to those conversations, students win,
Yeah, I
which
think
is where we
That's
live.
a really, really excellent point. The more parents know that there is flexibility, it's happened in my own household. Like we've shifted things around and it's been fantastic, but it required parents reaching out. So
Yeah.
how do we educate parents that 6th grade is not the end all be all, and that's not
Right.
you're not stuck.
I know we've discussed ways of talking to 5th grade parents maybe, or, just communicating that, because I feel like I had the same conversation over and over again, and yet there's got to be a better way,
Right.
So
can you talk a little to that 5th, 6th grade transition and what are you thinking about that? And what are your strengths there? What are the weaknesses there? What do you think could be better in that?
So when I started in this role, there was one single test for placement into course 3 was what it was called. And what I witnessed that year was like over 200 students in the cafeteria at Middlesex, and then students crying and parents waiting outside. It was just, it didn't seem like the best approach. And then through the years with Linda Johnson, and we've tried to tweak it and make it better. So we had a performance-based assessment, and we had the mid-year assessment, and then the nonverbal LSATs as placement. And we have a waiver. So we're working on it. We're trying to make it better. I don't know, there's no perfect system. I do communicate to parents who do reach out that last year we moved 11 students up in September. We give all students in 6th grade a diagnostic test anyway to see that, what are they coming in knowing? Most students forget a lot over the summer, so, but we keep the conversation open and we move students accordingly. So I don't know, that's something that we're working on in the acceleration committee, because when we visited other schools, we discussed, what are your placement procedures? And what we found overwhelmingly is that people just look at the whole child, looking at the whole picture. So.
Can I just add, sorry, I know you have a question. I think part of the problem is, and sometimes it's the first time academically that parents feel that there's a bar. And maybe if there's even some conversation, at the school level with the principals of like, look, this is an entry point. It's not the only entry point, and it may or may not be the right entry point, but helping to explain that there are other times and ways, and it's not that you need to get a tutor over the summer, and it's not that you need to try to fit a course into a month to catch your kid. Like that's, if we're talking about stress and what our kids are experiencing, and that there are other pathways for kids. And part of having a pathway now is there are kids who have been yearning for it. And so we're trying to give them a place, but that doesn't mean if your kid's not yearning for it now, there's not time for them later. I do think part of it is this feeling of, if I don't get on this now, I won't ever again.
Right.
I won't have a chance.
I hear
And the
that,
answer is
too.
there's some kids who are ready, and it's okay if you're not ready, and it's okay if you're ready in 2 years. We'll work with you.
I was going to sort of speak to that also, and I think no, that's all right. You said it very nicely, very clearly. I think it's of value to communicate that to elementary parents as early as possible, because I do remember, at least in my own experience, lots of parents who felt like they suddenly found out that this was going to happen and their whole child's future math career was going to be decided, and it was not even on their radar. So if we can manage that up front, and I'm sure that we're doing more of that these days, but so that people know that this is one step and that there are all these other pathways, et cetera, I think is terrific. I had a sort of question or a thought. It may not be fully formed, but it's my understanding that a number of students double down in high school to get a second math class in part also to be prepared for standardized tests, so that they've covered the material that will appear on their ACT or SAT or both. And
That may be a motivation.
okay, and I don't know, as we move forward, if those tests are going to become or continue to be less and less critical to the application process, if that will be less of a driver. Just throwing it out there as a thought.
Mrs. Worm. My only thought was maybe because I know I didn't. The younger parents don't really understand what multivariable calculus is.
I know.
And how few actually need it. So anecdotally, I had a conversation with a child. He's not a child anymore. He's an adult, right? He was a top student at Darien. He went to Yale. He took multivariable calculus as a senior. He also got perfect PSAT score. He's one of those. He said he wanted to cry with multivariable calculus. And he was afraid that he was going to get his Yale admission pulled because he was struggling with it so much. And he had never struggled ever. So, I think maybe a little education on what that class really is and how few really need it or would really want to take it might be helpful.
Yeah.
Just saying.
So I think, interestingly, I think you're going to find the acceleration study is pretty comprehensive in addressing a lot of what we're talking about, because you can't address one thing without the other. But our last piece of data really that we have to collect is talking to students at both ends. So students that started the double acceleration this year and students that are ending that had that experience, and really to try to get to the why on both ends from a student perspective, because I think that's important information for us to know and help frame the thinking of the recommendations.
So I would just add, I think Mrs. Best was being very honest. I think the concern sometimes is of parents hitting that junior year is, how do I balance a strenuous workload, but making sure my child has seen something that they're going to be measured on, right? Whether we agree with SATs or think it's a valid measure, like that's a different debate. And so maybe that's something for the department to think about. Like maybe there is a summer offering for, like, you might see problems like this, or something to familiarize, or talk to parents, say your kid, I don't know. I did not take multivariable calc ever. It was not an option. Or talk to parents about the fear, because maybe the fear is not real, but it is in the community. So I would say maybe have some messaging to parents, like your children can take these standardized tests and be just, I mean, I think you can take any standardized test and be fine. So I don't want to overstate it, but if there's not a concern, if that concern is maybe create overly anxious, maybe we can talk to that as a district. And if it's not, and we have, maybe we can come up with some ways to familiarize students who would otherwise not be in that level of a math class. So, but I think Mrs. Best is really, has put her finger on it. That's the concern. Valid or not, I don't know, because I don't take that kind of math.
Anything
Or
else?
physics for that matter. So I'm not picking on math, science department too.
Any further questions for Dr. Bellows? No? Thank you for your
Thank you.
excellent information.
Yeah, I just would like to recognize Felicia for her, actually, she exemplifies in many ways, all of the department chairs, all the work tremendous work that gets done, just putting things up doesn't make sure it happens or it's implemented in that way. And the programs that you offer here, we offer for our students are fabulous. Even to get a teacher to teach multivariable algebra or multivariable calculus is unbelievable. And I appreciate your recognition of it. But from support services for our students to different modes of options for students to jump in, acceleration to oversee all of those things wouldn't happen with the level you want it to happen, and expertise without our department chairs. We also have, the supervision and evaluation of our mathematics department, which is absolutely phenomenal. I went to the science fair last night. The mathematics behind some of those science things is just tremendous. So anyway, I just want to express appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
And it doesn't start without a good elementary foundation.
That is
So
true.
thank you.
That's
Mrs.
exactly
Stroller.
Yes, thank you.
Let's cover K through 12.
All righty, without further questions, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Nope, public comment.
Oh, public comment, sorry. I always forget public comment. I don't see anybody on Zoom. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to public comment? No, okay. Now may I have a motion to adjourn?
No hands raised, you're good.
All right,